morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're tuning in from across the country and around the world. This is the Life Midwest Podcast, a podcast that focuses on different social, I don't want to say issues, because we don't like being controversial. Wes, what the hell are we? What are we?
Fair weather type of people?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm Kevin Palmer, and that's Wes Shirley, and together we are not the Wonder Twins, but, we're here to talk about stuff. How's your week going, man?
Oh, my week's going same as it goes every week. Do a little bit of work, do a little bit of play.
Doing it.
Just doing it.
Oh, man, sounds like we were talking before the show started, and you sound like you have a lot going on with work.
Oh, yeah, it rains because, nature and whatnot, but also it like rained. Like it did a big rain. So I don't know if I mentioned this on the last episode or if I just mentioned it to Kevin after, but my apartment flooded out a bit. About a quadrant of my living room was pretty swampy. It also did kind of the same at work. So same situation, heavy rain and then flood.
Big rain. Big rain. Yeah. A big rain. Would you say it's more of a swamp or more of a marsh type of deal?
Realistically, it's probably more like a swamp. Aren't marshes and swamps the same thing?
No, they are actually. Hold on, let's look.
I know there's the Manhattan Marsh Reserve here in Toledo, one of the newest, or I believe the newest Toledo Metro Park.
Let's see here. According to reconnectwithnature.org, swamps are predominantly forested, while marshes have few, if any, trees, but are home to grasses and, Yeah,
it'd be like a water plains as opposed to a water forest.
Yeah. So, looks like unless there's some trees sprouting through your rug there, you're looking at marshes.
I don't know that there's not trees sprouting in the rug. If you take a microscope, I bet there are trees there. I'm gonna call it a swamp.
Okay. I'll stay out of your swamp, Shrek.
I was about to go right into it, but I don't need to be doing a Shrek impersonation over the live podcast.
Oh, come on, it's live. Do it for fun.
I'm so bad at it. Get down to my it's fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger. Out of my swamp. I can't do it.
That's not getting edited out.
I don't have a bit of Austin Powers in my body.
The website goes on to say that there are 3 kinds of marshes: tidal freshwater marshes, tidal saltwater marshes, and inland freshwater marshes. Normally we spend, when we come back from the break is normally when we spend time looking through emails and reviews, things like that. We actually have an email. We mentioned it last week from Derpidoo. And it was in reference to our episode from 3 weeks ago at this point about not the labor shortage. I don't want to call it the labor shortage. What would you say, Wes? What would you want to coin that phrase as?
I think it's popularized recently as a labor shortage, but just a shortage of employees in general at the moment.
Okay.
In places that are low paying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I after reading Derbidoo's email here, I have a hard time calling it labor shortage, and our listeners will find out why soon. So we got this email last week from Derbidoo, and we wanted to look at the subject matter from the other perspective, not as to defend or discuss the mentality of the other perspective, but there's obviously issues on both sides, and we need to discuss the issue of the other side. Is that accurate, Wes? Would you say that's?
Yeah.
Right. NASCAR. So before we begin, I just, again, and I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. Here at the show, we care about our communities, our society, humanity as a whole. I think that's, easy to say that's a lot of the reason why we do what we do. So this is going to be another one of those like public service announcements of sorts. Today, our message is to employers, though, whereas a few weeks ago it was to employees. We want to talk about not necessarily the entire reason why there is a quote unquote shortage of employees to go around, the contributing factors coming from the angle of employers, if that makes sense. So this is definitely a topic that Wes and I feel strongly about. I always want to preface that this is much like the last few episodes. It is conjecture. While some of it's factual, some of it's not. And I think we'll be pretty clear in when it is and when it isn't. I think it'll be easy to tell when it is and when it isn't.
Yeah. I mean, we're probably going to hit on some factual stuff, but like, you know, a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
So Wes, what would you say is the first issue coming from this perspective of employers?
I think the quote unquote labor shortage is really just a wage shortage. And we mentioned that on the last episode regarding this topic, or the other side of this topic rather. And it's nobody wants to work for some old crusty ass establishment and then not even make what they need to like survive at the bare minimum, at least. And like, we can all think about this ourselves. When I think about what I expect an employer to pay me, I consider what I need at the end of the day to survive, first of all, but also not be miserable. I only have a few expectations. One being that I need to make enough money to pay my bills. I would ideally like to eat healthy, like, so healthy food's a little bit more expensive than like highly processed box food off the shelf or frozen food. And then I want to have some fun, as I think everyone does. And without having those basic needs met, why even exist? Like, why live? Thus, I plan to never work for an employer whose compensation does not meet those few criteria. And of course, that's subjective. My bills don't equal your bills, and my allowance I put aside for fun doesn't equal everyone else's allowance they set aside for fun. Like, mine's next to zero. A billionaire, I don't think they have an amount in mind. So obviously it's all subjective and situational. And I would imagine most people have these similar methods of choosing employment.
Right. And I think the main reason that we're having this discussion is because there's a growing number of people who feel this way. And I just want to pause real quick and read over Derpadu's email, because he does a great job reflecting of what Wes is saying and really has been the inspirational point for this episode and what we want to kind of form and base the conversation off of. So Derpadu says, "Hey guys, longtime listener, first time emailer, and I had some thoughts on your subject about fast food and the quote unquote labor shortage in general. First and foremost, there isn't actually a labor shortage. There are always more people in this country than there have been jobs," which he brings up a good point. I think Wes and I are just really bad at titles and don't know what else to call it. But I think to a lot of people, it's perceived as a labor shortage. There are not enough people working right now. He goes on to say, which I'm sure is obvious, but to make my point, it had to be said. The quote unquote shortage is of people willing to work modern slave wages for F-tier work. I assume this is where Derpadu is talking about minimum wage jobs, just any minimum wage job you can think of. So,
or slightly above, even,
or slightly above. Yeah, I mean, because really, how much? What is D tier work? You know what I mean? Good point, Wes. Derpadu goes on to say, COVID assistance, along with reckless reopenings, have shown the general population that they are just a number to a lot of faceless corporations that exploited them. In terms of increased wages versus increased service prices, a few studies have shown that prices are still keeping trend with inflation rather than responding to employees' wages. He does include a link here, which we will also put in the podcast description if you're interested in reading more. He says, "I saw a statistic somewhere that said when the minimum wage in Washington state rose to $13 an hour and Seattle to $15 an hour, the average increase for sale prices went up about 5 cents. And that's honestly really crazy to think about, guys. If you a $2 an hour difference is nothing to sneeze at. If you get a $2 an hour raise, I think most people are pretty happy about that. However, nobody sees a $2 raise in a year, first of all. Second of all, 5 cents is not a big change. And again, it's more keeping trend with, I think, inflation than it is to employee wages. And I think a change in 5 cents in the average sale price for a good or service is very evident of that. Derpadu finishes off saying, "Anecdotally, here in the greater Seattle area and in other large metros, I'd bet, it's cost of living that is a major driver of the cost for goods and service. For example, rent prices for businesses have increased just as quickly as those for residential properties. This makes your Big Mac meal more expensive the closer to Seattle you get, which could very well explain the difference Wes sees in his Dunkin' Donuts experience, where he was in difference in state and local taxes and laws aside. Would you agree with that, Wes? I think that's a really good point that it brings up too with your Dunkin' Donuts experience that you talked about.
Yeah, I didn't really consider it, but it is cheaper. Like tax in general is cheaper in Michigan. I believe Monroe, the area I was living in, has a lower cost of living than, let's say, Sylvania, or where I tend to be getting fast food often.
Right. So I think a lot of people miscorrelate this and they draw this conclusion between the average wage or the average income of somebody and the average cost of a good or service compared to somewhere else. Whereas it's actually more of the cost. It's more about the cost of living. Gerberdue finishes up here saying, great work, guys. And if you need to stand in host next time you all are on vacay, let me know. Hey, you never know when Wes is going to want to dip out for a week. So, hey, that may even happen pretty soon. I hear the Delta variant is kicking up, and Wes is ready to go in there vaccinated, double masked, and with his syringe of truth to fight the pandemic from resurfacing. Isn't that right, buddy?
Yeah, I fight viruses on my free time, not in like a virological way, like in a physical action-packed way.
You know, dog containment by day, viral fighter by night. Not all heroes wear capes, buddy.
I once punched an amoeba in the snout.
He's telling straight up facts, folks. Straight up facts. And thank you, Gerberdue, by the way, for the email and reaching out. We really appreciate it. We will later on the show talk about how you can email us and get on conversations, what we talk about in future episodes. But going back to what you were saying, Wes, before I read the email, what would your message be to employers then?
Why would anybody work for you? When you pay so little, it's laughable. You know everything's more expensive these days. Your bills have gone up too. 100% guarantee that. When you built that new fence or whatever it is you built, you have money and land, so you build things. And you paid a lot for the wood. You didn't just like not notice that. And wood prices are expensive in case people didn't know, but so are a lot of other commodities. And so is like cost of living and rent and stuff like that. Yet you pay your employees an hourly wage identical to what it was before this price raise. You have the nerve to raise your prices to accommodate your own bottom line at the expense of the customer, no less. But nobody who helps you make that money gets a meaningful raise to accommodate their bottom line. As a customer, this maddens me, but as an employee, a working member of society, someone who can be an employee, I just can't be bothered with places like that, which goes back to my sentiment earlier. I just won't work for a place that isn't willing to pay me what I need at the bare minimum to not be miserable.
And I think what you see in turn with that is I think you end up seeing people go to those restaurants less because they know it's going to impact the service and they're going to get bad service. I have noticed in the last 2 weeks alone, Wes, I have noticed a very different level of traffic in fast food places, with the exception of the average, lunch hour, dinner, whatever. People are expecting long lines and they don't want to deal with it, so they're just going home and making a sandwich instead. I don't know if you've noticed that. I don't know if any other listeners have noticed that. I don't want to leave out our listeners around the world because we're very much talking about an issue in the States and here in the Midwest, which maybe that's what we're supposed to be focusing on anyway, since that's the title of the show and that's what you're here for. But I just don't want to get too sidetracked and too tunnel visioned into how this is strictly just an America thing. If this is happening elsewhere, I really would want to know about it. I'd really want to talk about it. I'd want to hear from those listeners, those people. So, if you're experiencing this where you live, reach out to us, talk about it. What do you see? Are you noticing a difference in traffic at fast food restaurants? Wes, are you noticing that difference that I was talking about? Do you see people foregoing fast food because they expect bad service at this point?
It's paradoxical, I believe. At certain times, the fast food line is just absolutely out of control, wrapped around the building twice and moving at snail speed. And at other times where there's not much of a motivation to go there because you have other options, you're not generally stuck to a localized area because you're working or whatever. Yeah, I do think, and I personally feel that way. I still go through drive-thrus, especially if it's convenient. But if I see a long line, I'm just not going there. If I don't see anything on my way home, I am literally making a sandwich. And we didn't talk about this beforehand, but I felt personally attacked there because you were describing me accurately.
No, but I 100% echo that sentiment. I happen to notice that there's been a few days where I've rolled through the drive-thru, there's been no traffic, and it's like 5:15 p.m. and I'm in and out with, just a large Coke or something, and it's just kind of mind-boggling to me. So I guess that's one silver lining of all of this shit show. But yeah, I think I want to talk about what this means for obviously there's going to be the conversation of unemployment is going to come up. So I want to address that. I think there's this, Wes called it something before the show. It was really brilliant. The opportunity cost of going back to work. And I think as an individual, when you stumble upon, an employer's advertisement, like now hiring whatever, they're immediately looking for the compensation package, right? And by compensation package, I mean hourly wage. You see all these signs like, starting at, most of them say up to, because they want to show the biggest number possible. They'll say up to $14 an hour, whatever. I think you look at that number and then you weigh it against your current cost of living, your current income. Let's say that you're on pandemic assistance. Let's say that you're not working. You lost your job due to the pandemic or circumstances through the pandemic, whether it's direct or indirect. And that's your opportunity cost. If you're still on that pandemic assistance, and you're making $600 a week, $2,400 a month, $10 an hour isn't going to compete with that. $2,400 a month is essentially $15 an hour. I'm really bad at math, but I think I'm pretty close on that, right, Wes?
Yeah, something like that.
So I think you're weighing out again, Wes. You pointed it out brilliantly before the show. The opportunity cost of going back to work. You're basically considering the fact that you may be losing free money. Again, in the case of somebody who is unemployed or on some sort of financial support, this is generally money that one does not have to trade valuable time for and pays out in two ways. One in money and the other in free time that can be used for anything from enjoying a hobby to building a future. We've talked about that before too. I think for the first time in a long time, there is a group of people in this country right now who have been able to rediscover themselves, rediscover their life, what their passions are, what they love, and be able to devote time to it. And I think that's been very life-changing for a lot of people. I think a lot of other people have sat there and said, shit, I've been working too much. I've been wasting too much of my life. But that's, you know what? I think we have a part 3 of this episode, Wes.
Existentialism of the pandemic and its consequences, 2021.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that actually, because I'm real big on psychological conjecture. So that's exciting. So now I know this is a common arguing point for those against government assistance, where you're like, oh, we're paying people too much, they're staying home. But we often hear that from those who can't seem to keep employees. But my question is, why would somebody who's making free money, right, essentially, quote unquote, free money, right? Let's just, for sake of argument, we'll be facetious here. Why would they pay the opportunity cost to make labored money, unless that labored money was at an amount above the free money that they were making after, accounting for those opportunity costs? Now, there's an important caveat to this, I would say, and I think that's if you're, as Derpidoo mentioned, F tier work. I think D tier work also falls into this. I think no one's going to go back to work for an extra 50 cents an hour average over what they're making now just to be more miserable than what they are. I think there has to be a substantial difference. So let's look at a few opportunity costs that potentially an employer or even an employee may overlook. And I think the big one is health insurance. Wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, health insurance is fucked.
It really is. Hot takes, but it really is. Think about how if one is receiving government assistance already, they probably get health care from the government as well. More than likely. I don't know what the percentage is, but more than likely, with the exception of people on pandemic assistance, I would assume. But when one becomes employed and they make a certain amount of money, they lose access to that free healthcare from the government. And now they must buy their own. Most people do this through their paycheck, obviously. So it's like a pre-tax deduction, or they pay into like a health savings account, depending on what their employer offers, if their employer offers one. Remember, there are professions and jobs out there, many, that do not include health benefits. If they became ill or had to use their health insurance, they would then have to pay deductibles, co-pays, co-insurances, percentages, etc., on top of their monthly premiums. There's a group of people that we're not talking about when I say this, though. Wes, are you familiar with the Medicaid Gap?
I'm not sure I've heard about it.
So when the Health Care Act of I believe 2012 it was passed.
Obamacare? No one wants no Obamacare. The Affordable Care Act.
The Affordable Care Act. That's what it was called. Yes. Thank you. The Affordable Care Act of 2012. Google me. Make sure that's 2012.
Yep.
Okay, great. There was a large portion of people who were covered, and there was a large portion of people who weren't covered. And I'm not going to go into why that is, or why that didn't happen, or why that was, unsuccessful in covering everybody. But you have a group of people who are in that gap. And I think that's what we're talking about today, too. But when we're talking about health insurance, it's a really great example. When the Health Care Act passed, you had people who were covered by Medicaid, and those people didn't make enough money to pay for a government market plan, or a public plan, I think it was called, where you paid a premium out of pocket to have health insurance. You also didn't make enough money, or didn't have an employer that offered health insurance. Obviously, if you made enough money, then you were fine. You could pay for it out of pocket, or your employer paid it. But there was a group of people in that gap called the Medicaid gap who weren't covered. And I think that's what we're experiencing now with the labor shortage, where you can't have that D tier work because for F tier pay, I can stay at home and try to enjoy my life the best I can, instead of a 50-cent wage increase on average over that to go be more miserable. I think that same gap is what exists right now between pandemic assistance and a livable premium wage to enjoy a fulfilling life and job. Would you agree with that, Wes?
Yeah, you're paying an opportunity cost in the form of the hassles that come with having to take care of paying healthcare just to work, so you don't feel bad about not working. And I think most people have stopped feeling bad because it's quite ridiculous.
Yeah, I think people have had enough. I think there's been, a lot of reflection through this pandemic where people have said, I want to spend time with my family. I want to enjoy my hobbies, the things that I'm passionate about in life. I don't want to leave my dog home alone for 9 hours a day. I know personally I don't want to leave Mac alone home for 9 hours a day. Not because he misbehaves. He's the best boy in the world.
Didn't he shit on the floor last episode?
No.
The episode before?
That was 10 episodes ago.
Oh.
And that was in a store, and he really had to go.
Well, I guess good boys have to go too.
Everybody poops. It's a book. Read it. But again, do they want to spend time with their families, enjoy hobbies, not leave their dog home alone for 9 hours a day? Let's just go ahead and deduct the rest. This hypothetical job seeker has just laughed at your advertisement and decided there's no use in getting mixed up in all of that. Why would I do that? Not me personally, but theoretically, I'm sitting at home. I'm collecting what is equivalent nearly to $15 an hour post-tax. Why am I going to go work for $14? Why am I going to go work for $15.50? In essence here, just remember people receiving government assistance generally live below the poverty line. And employers seem unable or unwilling to pay wages that compete with even that. So what's the issue here, Wes? Government assistance or employers?
I think we should leave that up to the listeners. But then there's also what if you have a side hustle going on? Do you now limit your hours of operation to after your job, where you're making less money than you were making and having all that free time to do your side hustle? And to be fair, I'm not saying go commit fraud and do a side hustle while you're getting government assistance, although I suspect some people do. What I am saying is, why would anyone give up their opportunity to make more money to go make less money? Back to your question, I think the audience has made up their mind. Maybe not, but some have.
Right. Like, I don't want to answer the question for them. But again, you have to ask yourself, what's the issue? Government assistance or employers? And I think, again, why would I give up things to make less money? Who would give up things to make less money? Coming up, wages that do make sense when we return. Welcome back, everyone, to the Life Midwest podcast, the show that seems to always talk about money.
Because we're poor.
I'm Kevin Palmer, and that's Wes Shirley. And Wes, you still have udders? You still a cowboy?
I most certainly do. Howdy, howdy.
That's a NASCAR.
That is a NASCAR. Are we appropriating Southern culture?
If you're looking for ways to support us or are appropriating Southern culture, you can reach out to us at support@thelifemidwest.com. Send us an email like Derberdew did and jog our brains for an entire episode today that is clearly way over time. But hey, if you like us, keep listening. You can also leave us a review on iTunes. Got 6 5-star reviews, and really appreciate those and always loving more. If your right thumb or left thumb is feeling that scratch and itch, to hit that 5-star button for us. We really appreciate it. You can also reach out to us on all our major social platforms at The Life Midwest or slide into our DMs.
Oh, yeah.
I'll let you guys guess which one is Wes's favorite. So, other than the email that we read from Derberdew, which thank you again to Derberdew at the $5 level, Patreon, we should have some more content that's coming up here in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about that more. Stay posted to our social media, as I will post more information once we are ready to share it as far as what we have on there and coming up. In the meantime, before we leave you all for this week, I want to talk about employers just a little bit more. Why do employers feel so entitled to good, hardworking employees who accept whatever pittance they're offered?
Well, I provide the jobs. I give them the money. I give them the opportunity to make the money. They'll take whatever they get and they'll be happy, or else they're not eating.
Do you feel this way? Do you have friends that feel this way who own businesses? Do people in your own family or people that you work with or talk to or converse with every day feel this way? If so, I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Wes Shirley, on our next segment, Wages That Do Make Sense. Take it away, buddy.
In a better world, when a job seeker decides to become somebody's employee, there is an agreement that is made between both parties. The employer agrees to pay a livable compensation to the employee, and the employee agrees to work in a way that's beneficial to the employer. Ideally, there's some give and take, both power and respect for both parties, and the option to negotiate wages as cost of living goes up is available. As an employer, your work does not get done without your employees. So try and remember your place a bit, and show the employee a little bit of respect. If you follow my advice, excluding instances where it's just an obvious job mismatch, I suspect your labor ailment may recede. If you are truly incapable of paying your employees a livable wage without putting yourself into reasonable financial risk, there's a problem with your government. I suggest you and your employer friends who are experiencing this same phenomenon, this same nationwide problem where people just don't want to work, I suggest you petition the government. Maybe they could allocate some funds to making it so the employees can live on a wage that makes sense to you. Thank you.
That was Wes Shirley with Wages That Do Make Sense. Special thanks to our guest speaker, Wes Shirley, this week for his mini TED Talk on Wages That Do Make Sense. We appreciate you. I'm going to go ahead and give our guest speaker a shout out. I'll start out with the shout outs this week with a big shout out to Wes Shirley on bringing together some incredible show notes here to go off of Derpadoo's email. Great job this week, buddy.
Yes, thank you. I know I kind of play the silly, lovable, derpy sidekick, but like this is awesome. This was my ideal that I wanted to see happen, was people actually send in emails and we do a show off of them. I think that's so cool. So while I don't normally do the frontman stuff, I am also very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really good point. Shout out to Derperdoo, and shout out to Amanda as well. A couple people, who have reached out to us personally through our email, had some conjecture. We want people to join in on the conjecture. So please feel free to do the same. Support at thelifemidwest.com. Hey, folks, we are going to get the hell out of here. While you're waiting to hear from us next week, call your mom. Have a good one. Have a safe 4th of July. Yeah, 4th of July is tomorrow because this show is live. Don't go blowing off any fingers, folks. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.
Deuces.